Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first School Climate Transformation Grant webinar. We are focused on effective teaming for improved results. My name is Susan Barrett. I am with the Center on PBIS, and I am joined by my friend and colleague, Joni Splett. You want to say hi, Joni?
Hi, everybody. I'm Joni Splett. Thanks for joining us. I'm in the school psychology program, an associate professor at the University of Florida.
Awesome. And we're so grateful that you have joined us this morning. We are recording it, so if you're not here live, or if you're not here live, you're not here live. But if you have colleagues that are interested in this topic, we will post it on our website. We also want to acknowledge our other colleagues, Kelly Perales and Mark Wiest, who contributed to the presentation, but aren't able to join us here this morning. So with that, let's just get started. Let's jump in. We want to first kind of set the stage by operationally defining what PBIS is. It's this huge systems change movement we find ourselves in as a result of going through the last couple of years. And we want to be really crystal clear that PBIS actually organizes the adults in the system, right? And it's specifically important that the district level organization help schools navigate these turbulent times. And so PBIS actually organizes the adults across the cascade of implementation, but specifically we want to focus on the district role in this work. And we want to make sure that we are focused on achieving the specific outcomes that our community values. And we do this through an understanding of data. We do this through evidence-based practices that we select based on the strengths and needs of who we're serving. And we focus on really supporting the adults through coaching, through ensuring that they have the adequate resources that they need. So it's always continuously changing and evolving. And so we want to offer some of the ways that we have strengthened PBIS, specifically across the last decade, but really in the last couple of years, we've really been able to strengthen the kind of system. The big idea here is that through all of this is that PBIS is actually a team sport. We're never making decisions by ourselves. We are bringing a group of people together that represents our community, and we're co-designing the process together as a community. So many of you are familiar with the outcomes associated with implementation, but I want to call your attention to a couple of things here. First and foremost, this is just tier one fidelity of implementation. So when we are involved in a randomized controlled trial, we are studying the impact. And one of the things that we look at is fidelity of implementation first before we look to outcomes. And so this is an example of elementary schools who implement with fidelity at tier one. And I want you to look at the outcomes. Right? We get improved student outcomes related to academic performance, social emotional competence, social and academic outcomes for students with disabilities, reduction in bullying behavior, and decreased rates of student-reported drug and alcohol abuse. We see reduction in the use of exclusionary discipline practices, and we see improved teacher outcomes, specifically around school organizational health, perception of school safety, and perception of teacher efficacy. So if you're a system right now that's really concerned about the behavior challenges, one of the things you might want to consider is investing in strengthening and fortifying your tier one PBIS approach. If you're concerned about teacher wellness, you might want to consider, again, this double down on prevention, on building that pro-social community, not only for the students, but for the adults. And again, we want to emphasize the impact that just investing in tier one has. But we also know that we need to do a little bit more, right? There are a lot of things we can do to enhance our current way of work. And I want to start and kind of set the stage with this enhanced version of PBIS by offering this quote from the Secretary of Education. And he actually posted this about in March, in fact, of 2021. And he says this: in the past, student access to structured mental health services in schools hasn't been implemented in a functional way. It's been kind of after the fact. And we now have this opportunity in front of us to redesign schools forever and make sure that mental health services are a core part of the school's DNA. So today, Joni and I are going to talk about ways that we are seeing school systems across the country pull in our mental health partners into the teaming structures across all tiers of support. Rather than thinking of situating mental health in a separate team, we're going to actually talk about pulling them into the school improvement process. And we're going to give some examples about this. So I love this graphic, right? How do we invest in one framework, in one common way of work? You know, we find ourselves really exhausted right now for a number of reasons, but we were exhausted before COVID. We were trying to do way too many things. And it's really important that we consolidate our teaming structures. And so when we are looking at an interconnected approach where we are using one common way of work, no matter if we're in the academic domain or the social, emotional, behavioral domain, we have to make sure that we aren't inadvertently setting up siloed supports in our teaming structures. And so it's not about having a behavior support team that's kind of situated off to the side. And in addition to that, we have a school mental health team. And in addition to that, we have a social emotional learning team, right? It seems like every acronym that comes to the table, we set up a separate team. And in doing so, we're ending up siloing ourselves and competing, right? Having competing kind of initiatives. Instead of doing that, we would rather incorporate social, emotional, behavior, and wellness into every aspect of the academic domains, right? So if I'm a literacy teacher, if I'm a math teacher, I'm going to incorporate social, emotional, behavior, and wellness strategies right into my academic content. And so it's not situated on the side, and it's not just a few people engaged in this process. This is going to be a commitment that we have all hands on deck, that everybody has a role to play. And I want to be really clear, we're not asking our educators to be mental health providers, but we are asking them to teach skills and strategies in the context of their classroom that truly is seamless. And so many of our teachers do this automatically, right? It's just part of the art of teaching. They are comfortable in that space by bringing in a school-wide calming strategy right before they take a test. But so many of our teachers aren't comfortable in this space. So it's going to be really important that we provide ample training and coaching. So we're supporting them along the way as we ask them to engage in something that we've never asked them to do before. So it's about one set of social, emotional, behavior, and academic teams. It's committing to one way of work. And no matter if it's an academic need or social, emotional need, we're gonna use those core features that PBIS offers to guide the way forward. So again, I want you to think, as we're interconnecting this work together, I want you to consider the language that we use, right? It's going to be really, really important as we move forward. I want us to consider moving away from looking at data and seeing data as, oh, here are the non-academic indicators and here are the academic indicators. Let's just call them indicators of success. When it comes to forming a mission statement, I love this one that's offered by the Institute of Medicine, where they talk about really the ultimate goal is to create a society in which young people arrive at adulthood with the skills, interests, assets, and health habits needed to live healthy, happy, productive lives in caring relationships with others. I know as a mom of two boys, when I always went to meet the school and meet the teachers, I was most interested in whether or not they were happy in their environment. If they were eating lunch with a group of friends, if they were navigating the healthy habits within the classroom. I was much more interested, if you will, in the other side of the report card. And yes, I realized that reading and math skills were really important, but I was very keenly interested in making sure that when my kids graduated, they had the skills to be healthy and productive in their lives. And so I wonder, as we lean into listening to our family partners right now, if we could ask them what they want for their kids, what are their priorities? And that might help us bring in that notion of equal priority. But what's the ultimate mission of schools? And what if wellness was central to the mission of every school? What kind of impact would that make across the landscape of the outcomes that we're keenly interested in? What about the budget? Do we adequately budget for situating wellness in the fabric, right? What about our accountability system? If we're just holding ourselves accountable for academic outcomes, what does that do in terms of offsetting this notion of equal priority? And finally, how do we integrate professional development and coaching supports in this landscape of really making sure we are enhancing what we're doing? So I want to move to a really quick example. This comes from Central School District in Oregon. And it really, this was a result of bringing a team together. It was led by the superintendent of schools, Jennifer Kubista, and she led a full community-wide group through a resource mapping activity that allowed them to take an inventory of all the current teams that they had in place that were helping to support social, emotional, behavior, and wellness needs. And this is just a small number of the teams they had currently going on. So you can see there's a lot of redundancy here, right? They had a district equity team. They had a district SEL mental health team. They had student services mental health planning. They had a whole child team, right? And so when you look at all of these things, you notice the redundancies, and they did a really smart thing. At the same time they were resource mapping, they looked at their data and they made a commitment to work more effectively and efficiently. And they consolidated all of those teams into an interconnected district community leadership team. And they used their data to guide their work groups. Which items are we going to prioritize right now? And they said, we will commit to no more than 3 work groups right now because people are overwhelmed. And so they committed to a whole child work group that focused on selecting and deselecting, right? The menu of evidence-based interventions that they were going to choose across the district, but they were going to base it on data. They also wanted to focus in the second work group on staff development, specifically on staff wellness, and not just having staff making sure they were taking care of themselves, but really this culture of care for staff and making sure that staff felt that they had adequate resources and adequate training to do what we were asking them to do. And finally, the third work group was really around how do we make sure we connect students really quickly to supports? And what's that system look like? And how do we unpack that to make sure that we're consistent across all of our schools within our district? The other thing I love about this example is they felt like even that was too much. So when they actually asked staff what they prioritize, all the staff said, we need help. We are really struggling and we need training and support and we need to focus on staff wellness right now. And so they moved that into the one and only thing that they're going to laser focus on this year because it came directly from staff. So how might you situate and consolidate your teams across the district? If you're a district leadership team, think about using a resource mapping activity where you can just list all of the current teams and maybe look at the redundancies that are taking place and identify through your data which work groups should we be focused on right now. And can we limit it to 3? And if that seems like it's too much right now, maybe use a Central School District's example and prioritize one thing. So a couple of implementation tips before I turn it over to Joni. One, it's really important to consolidate right now. And it's really important to consolidate under school improvement. And number 2, use your data in aggregate. Look at the larger ecosystem. Look at the sheer numbers of need right now and use that data to prioritize your work groups that have those bidirectional feedback loops that are feeding right into the district community leadership team. So with that, I will turn it over to Joni.
Thank you, Susan, for the intro and setting us up and a short example to get us started. I'm going to talk a little bit about how, like, the cascade of teams and that cascade of implementation process. So this idea of expanding from just school teams to district leadership, state and regional. And in doing so, I just want to kind of situate us in this idea that expanding teams and at every level requires community partners be at the table, family representatives and youth. This quote comes directly from the implementation or the, I'm going to get the name wrong, Susan, the companion guide.
The action planning companion guide. Yep.
And so it, can go along with monitoring fidelity inventory and provide context for, identifying what 3 action plans you're going to select and where you're going to move. And in this area, this is a prime example of what needs to be considered when expanding teams. And so I want to first, this is a visual from a paper I published along with some other colleagues who were also part of our webinar today, Kelly Perales with Midwest PBIS and Mark Wiest with the University of South Carolina. And so we've been advancing the Internet Connected Systems Framework, and some of that work, which is an example of a multi-tier system, of which PBIS is as well. And so I think in one of your earlier slides, Susan, you had systems, data, practices as these core components and drivers of PBIS, and ISF being, using PBIS as a foundation, integrates into those components as well. And so this visual is just kind of operationalizing how that is done within each of those domains. And it really, to me, highlights the centrality of teaming in that process in any multi-tiered system, but most definitely in PBIS and in ISF, that teaming is a critical central driver of implementation for that. And when we look at expanding teams in that cascade, I'm going to go to the next slide, Susan. There's, many roles and functions of teams, and we expand those teams from what we're most used to being list building level teams, maybe a student problem solving team or a school-wide improvement team. And then we expand those and kind of move upstream. So we have the district community leadership team that Susan was talking about some. And we also really advocate for a state level leadership team. I know many states have that affiliated with PBIS. And so even in our ISF work, we try to make sure we're always linking upstream. And so regardless of where you are and that cascade of implementation from state, district, to school building, that you have a similar composition of team members. You can see across the bottom there, and you have a similar responsibilities. So in each case, you have administration at the table who are, are capable of making decisions and being key decision makers. That a problem isn't just discussed and, a resolution like dreamt about. There are people at the table who can actualize that decision or figure out like how it could be done and make sure it gets executed. And so there's follow through. And so each of those teams have, that authority person. Each of those teams have community partners so that the whole child perspective is represented and taken into account in making decisions. And so across the cascade of implementation, we also see that there's kind of a leadership team at each level driving implementation. So they may, as Susan was giving the example, they may have like work groups that are focused on very specific areas, but there's still that central leadership team at each of those levels. And they're still focused on, we might call them different things, but this executive functioning of the leadership team, those are the gray boxes on top, and then the kind of beigeish, brownish boxes on the bottom are those implementation components. Those are all functions of those leadership teams at each level. So we still see leadership at the building, district, regional, state levels, involved in stakeholder engagement and funding and alignment of initiatives and workforce capacity, focused on training needs and coaching and evaluation. And we see that across all levels. And I love this graphic too, because it really demonstrates that the involvement of external technical assistance. And I just, as I continue, work with just different districts, especially here in Florida, continually find that those who are really leveraging the external technical assistance resources get the most out of it and are really rolling out implementation the strongest, right? And so I think that, we're not just showing here that cascade of implementation, but how technical assistance is important at all levels. And so before I turn it back over, I've got another section. Never mind. I tried to get out of work. I do want to talk briefly before we move into more operationalizing some examples of teaming at these different levels. I want to just kind of give a brief, from my scientific background, it's not just anecdotally that we sit on teams and know they work. We have evidence from the scientific empirical literature that when done well, they have strong and positive effects on student behaviors and students making progress in intervention. The problem is kind of that lightning strike issue is that it's fraught with challenges. So Sylvia Rosenfeld out of the University of Maryland and some of her team did the systematic review of school teaming literature. It's in the American Psychologist, which is, kind of a lifetime achievement award, basically, in academia. So it's a very strong literature base, and they, identify these challenges that teams in schools meet with low frequency. They're not regularly held meetings, and they're not frequently held. The agendas are really vague. They show up and create it on the spot, and nobody really knows what they're supposed to be doing. And then there's, after the fact, the follow-up isn't adequate either. It's not strong enough. There isn't accountability for that. And so the agenda remains the same all year, and nothing gets followed through or completed. We do know, though, there's several examples where coaching or consultation or that kind of external technical assistance improves those challenges. And that's something we found in our own work. So we just completed a randomized control trial. Want to go ahead, Susan, a randomized control trial of the interconnected systems framework. We have a couple ongoing right now, but this is the first one to be completed. We showed some promising effects on student outcomes, and that paper, the We Split et al. 2021 is under review right now. So I'm not going to go until it's published. I'm not going to go share all of the results and outcomes, but we do have some promising positive effects on student outcomes. Pertinent to this webinar, I think, is really great and exciting as we more proximally to distal student outcomes, more proximally, we showed effects on teaming outcomes. So we were able to show that when we trained teams in the way of work of, this multi-tiered system, bringing together behavior and mental health, when we trained them on the systems, the data, and the practices, when we provided technical assistance and coaching and that support to the schools in the ISF condition, these 24 participating elementary schools, we had 8 of them being trained in the ISF, and those 8 ISF schools had more administrators attending their MTSS team meetings, more administrators involved. So they were involved with the coach, preparing for the team meeting, reviewing minutes, following through on their action items, right? And coming back to the next team meeting to report on what had been done. And we also had clinical staff. So we had more mental health professionals attending team meeting in ISF schools. And just more discussion of school-wide issues and planning to improve Tier 1 programming, which if you've worked in a school system, I was a school psychologist for about 5 years and in middle school and elementary school. And most of my team meetings were tier 2 or tier 3, right? Problem solving team meetings for individual students, tier 3 team meetings. I wasn't, as a mental health professional, involved in many tier 1 team meetings. And I think this is just a phenomenal outcome that we got a team comprised of educators and mental health professionals to talk about tier 1 together and plan programming together. And what that means for the upstream of tiers 2 and 3 is pretty exciting. So we know we have some science to support the importance of teaming. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about operationalizing district community leadership team, and then turn it over to Susan again to talk. I thought I saw a hand raised. Did I?
Yeah, I thought I did as well. I don't know that folks are able to unmute, but if there's a question in chat coming up, okay. I don't see chat when I'm sharing my screen at this time. So is there anything coming?
I can see chat and I'm not seeing it, right? Any messages. But if you have a question, I think you can put them a question or comment in the chat, because I'm not sure you're able to unmute. Definitely willing to take questions. So feel free to put them in there. So the next few slides are about the district community leadership level and come from a tool called the District Systems Fidelity Inventory. And I've just put on, or we have just put on those items from the District Systems Fidelity Inventory that pertain to leadership teaming. So you can see up there, section 1, leadership teaming. And what you'll notice is it gives criteria for team membership. So you can see families are included there on that item 1.2. General educators, special educators, individuals with detailed knowledge about current social emotional behavioral initiatives, and members of the local community. You can see that it outlines the criteria for expertise on the team, and making sure that there's authority there in item 1.1. If we look at the next set of items, you can see it also details criteria for team operating procedures. So meeting at least monthly. So that means that there's a regular meeting time, using standard meeting agendas. So really making sure that somebody is charged with making, that agenda and sticking to it and following through. There's a problem solving process that's followed. You can also see there's action planning there. The next set of items also make sure that at that district leadership, or at that leadership teaming, that there's bidirectional communication. So there's communication to executive leadership from the team, and there's also communication to key stakeholders who might not be on the team already. But maybe that's to, like the school board or family organizations, community organizations involved, politicians, keeping them engaged and in support of the efforts. So there's that bidirectional communication that's also aligns with, the executive functioning component of the leadership team. So in terms of operationalizing kind of the work of the district community leadership team, this tool is a really great place to start and gives some key specifics. So I'm going to hand it back over to Susan, who's going to operationalize school level teaming for us.
Thanks, Joni. So I don't see, I do see chat now. I don't see anything coming up on chat, but again, if you have any questions, you won't be able to unmute yourself or show yourself on video, but you can engage with us in chat. So if anything's coming up for you, you want to chime in and give us a what? Any feedback is helpful. It's awesome. So I'm going to talk about school level teaming, but to Joni's point, I really want you to think about the symmetry of process across the cascade of implementation. So how might we set these conditions up across the cascade, even though we're focused on school level teaming? I also want to be sure that you are aware of an updated document. So many of you are probably using the tiered fidelity inventory. And we put together an action planning companion guide that situates equity and mental health into the action planning process. So you would continue to score like you normally do using the standard TFI, the tiered fidelity inventory. But then when it comes time to action planning, you can use this resource to help you enhance a current feature. So for example, many teams right now You might have a tier 1 leadership team, a PBIS team, or an MTSS team, but you may not have family and youth and community partners on that team. So one of the things that you would be enhancing is this idea that we would want to make sure that we are situating youth and family and community perspective as you're expanding your team. And that enhancement guide will help you elaborate your current core features to consider some of the things that we're describing for you now. The other great thing about the tiered fidelity inventory, a lot of us are kind of caught up in checking all the boxes and scoring really high. It's actually really important that the team utilize that tool through the process of implementation and across the year to continuously self-assess. Where are we? How can we improve? Are we actually doing this? Which means that we need to get vulnerable, right? We need to get honest about where we are. We can't also wait for perfection until we add youth and family and community members to the team. We will never be satisfied with getting our house in order. And it's so important that we are vulnerable right time. And I also want you to consider that as we invite youth and family and community to the tier 1 team, we're never talking about individual students. So sometimes we put up that barrier of, we couldn't possibly invite others to the table because we're going to be talking about students and there'll be confidentiality that will be breached. But guess what? In tier 1, we're always talking aggregate. We're always talking systems level. And so we want to make sure that we don't let that barrier prevent us from making sure that we have that perspective included and that we are co-designing this together based on the community values and that they offer such an expanded lens of what's going on in the community. So the team is actually in a position of not waiting for people to fail before we kick it up a notch. We are actively seeking trends and patterns that are emerging in the community so we can fortify in real time what we're doing at the school to prevent the likelihood of failure inside our building. And so just want to make sure you're always using that as a quick assessment and a quick check. And again, here's an example of the actual item, the elaboration items where we're making sure that we are bringing in that mental health perspective, that trauma perspective, and we're not situating it on a separate mental health team, but rather pulling it into the leadership team, pulling it into the school improvement team, because the rationale is that the students' lives outside of school are really, really critically important to our programming inside school because that has a direct impact. Another thing that you can do to get started, and I mentioned this before when I was talking about Central School District, is taking an inventory of all the current teams and work groups and committees that you are supporting right now. And it turns out, again, there's a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of siloing off. We are trying to do way too many things. And every time a shiny new object or a shiny new initiative kind of comes into our purview, we create a team around that. And so the big idea here is how do we always work effectively and more efficiently and consolidate our team? So this is something that's not just, we did that resource mapping and now we're done. We continuously want to make sure that we are working as lean as possible, if you will, and that we don't just have the same staff over and over again meeting in these different teams, that we want to be more inclusive of everybody to be involved in this work. We also want to make sure that we are focused on a specific outcome and that we've got data that suggests that as a result of meeting and investing our time and resources in this, that students are benefiting from it. And so we love to use this as one of the activities to drive that effectiveness and efficiency component. Because holy cow, we're doing a lot. I mean, when we start to resource map, not only around teams, but also around initiatives that are taking place in our schools, man, we're trying to pull off a lot of stuff. And one of the things that we're hearing, even before kind of the COVID era from our staff, was we're exhausted because we're trying to do too much and we haven't really used data to help us have that laser focus on doing one or two things really well before we move to the next thing. I think in our society, we've got this notion that more is better. And if you buy this thing, it's the magic fairy dust approach. Buy me and I'll change your life. Well, turns out we've bought a lot and we're not doing a lot very effectively. And in doing so, we're exhausting our staff, which is not good. So that resource mapping activity, once you perhaps do that for the teams, it could be that you just list all the different initiatives you're trying to do right now. And maybe as a team, you select one or two things based on data to commit to this year, and you put everything else on the back burner, which is a really hard thing for us to do, but it's really, really important given that we're not doing anything very well. So I wanted to offer another way for a team to look at how you might consolidate your efforts. And I love this example because we're laser focused on the tier 1 components. And we are expanding the utilization of those tier 1 components to pull in wellness strategies, to pull in social emotional behavior skills into the tier 1 structure that you have worked so hard to develop. And so this could be a crosswalk that you just put in front of your team and you talk about the investment in tier 1 components. So let's look at the top one for a minute. When we define and teach explicitly our expectations, and it may be that right now we're really concerned about anxiety. That's popping up as a concern in our schools. And we're looking through our social emotional curriculum and we say, as a result of this concern, what are some things in our curriculum? What are some of the skills and strategies we could be focused on? Maybe we focus on the module around coping skills. And we can situate those strategies right into our teaching matrix where we model and we remind and prompt our children how to identify their feelings, how to express their feelings, how to use their words to express those feelings, and how we might insert using a deep belly breath to manage those feelings when they get overwhelmed. So when we're enhancing the utilization of what we've already done by way of those behavior lessons and that behavior teaching matrix, and we're positioning those calming strategies right into the teaching matrix, we're automatically incorporating social emotional learning skills. We're automatically incorporating that trauma-informed approach. And I think this really helps us acknowledge that they don't have to be separate. They can all kind of merge together in the practices that we select. So this could be a really good kind of example of a crosswalk that allows us to not put these things in kind of silos, but fully integrate our work together and alleviate some of that stress that we're feeling when we think, oh, I'm doing trauma-informed now, I'm doing SEL now, I'm doing behavior support now, I'm doing academic now. It's all kind of coalescing under those tier 1 components. So just to kind of end this section, we want to just really make sure that at each tier, you have youth and family and mental health situated on your tier 1 team, that we just don't position our wellness and our mental health leaders on our tier 2, tier 3 team. If we're really going to invest in a pro-social community, if we're really going to invest in this upstream approach, we need to situate them on our team and help us together collectively build our menu and focus on one or two things and do those really, really well, and then use data to guide where we go next. Remember, we never talk about individual kids in these systems planning teams across the tiers. It's really about coordinating and monitoring those interventions that are taking place within the tier. So it's a really important kind of this is kind of a different thing than we've been used to. We've been kind of used to talking about one student at a time. And while those conversations are really necessary and important, it's also really important to talk about the systems features within each tier and make sure that we are adhering to fidelity within each of those tiers before we assign blame to students for not being successful. So when we go to 1.2 on the tiered fidelity inventory, again, those routines are really, really critically important. Joni was talking about how critical the teaming is in the literature, and that most of the time we don't have a routine to fall back on. We don't use an agenda. So this item is all about strengthening our team operating procedures and making sure that we have coaching supports that's guiding our efforts. So again, we always want to use the tiered fidelity inventory to do a quick check, to do a quick self-assessment, and then make a plan for strengthening our commitment to building those operating procedures. And so we want to use a regular meeting format, a regular agenda. We want to use those team minutes. We want to hold ourselves accountable for investing in the work that's being done in between those meetings. We also recognize right now that for a lot of us, we get a lot of emotional support from our colleagues. And so it's going to be really, really important to pull in your meeting agenda a wellness check, a chance to debrief, a chance to connect and deepen our relationships with one another as we kind of bring people to the table. And we're recognizing that when each member of our team is valued and we feel a sense of belonging, we feel a sense of connection, we're going to increase our attendance. If we see the value add of me coming to this and I'm held accountable in a very supportive way, and I'm seeing impact on students, you're going to keep me at the table. So it's all about this improved decision-making. We don't want to just go from here's the problem to here's the solution. We want to take time to really invest in a problem-solving logic. And the team's initiated problem-solving is a full 2-day training that you can take your teams through to really solidify your data for decision-making across the tiers of support. So it's really about coalescing around the data, but taking a really deep dive in making sure that you're identifying the problem with accurate precision. And you're using the data to guide those precision statements so that you're not inadvertently doing something that for everybody, when actually it's just a small group of students who need a little bit more support. So it's really important that we use the data to drill down and we develop a precision statement before we start to build solutions, because we waste a lot of time and energy when we cast that net large and we think it's a bigger problem than it actually is. Within the team-initiated problem-solving training manual and the training itself, they do a really good job of breaking down all of the different roles and responsibilities and functions of people on the team. So we want to make sure we have a data analyst, right? A data geek, somebody that can prepare the reports ahead of time so that we can streamline our conversations around data. We want to make sure that we have a facilitator who can guide us through the meeting agenda at hand. We want to make sure that we have a minute taker who's taking notes, that holds us kind of accountable and is identifying really clearly those action steps that we're going to take in between our meeting time. And we want to make sure that we are communicating out to our larger community and having those feedback loops in place. So those routines and those procedures are really, really important. We want to make sure that you don't think you have to reinvent the wheel. So we wanted to offer some examples of a meeting minutes form. And we have seen states and districts and county offices take this TIPS form, this team-initiated problem-solving agenda, and modify it for them. And so we can really see the symmetry of process across the cascade of implementation because everybody's using a common meeting agenda. We're also seeing folks situate wellness checks on the meeting minutes themselves. And so make sure you're checking in with one another. I saw a fantastic example the other day where a superintendent joined us for a virtual team meeting, and we had a significant crisis take place in the school. And she ripped up the meeting agenda and said, we are going to take some space and process what's happened to us today. We're going to check in with each other, and we're going to take the whole hour to do that. And so I think that's a really good example of staying really close to what staff need right now. And we all need time to to be emotionally supported with one another before we can go to the problem solving kind of process and really take good care of ourselves. We've mentioned a couple of times that we want to bring family and community partners to give us that expanded context. And so while we have a ton of natural data sources that reflect out what the strengths and needs of our school community are, we want to take full advantage of that community information that our community partners bring to the table, that our families bring to the table. And so we want to make sure that we're screening from multiple views. And again, the job of the team, especially at Tier 1, isn't to sit back and wait for students to fail in our system. It's to actively pursue and uncover what the strengths and needs are. And so we wanted to give you a couple of examples of some of the community data that we're collecting, that we're talking about and discussing in our Tier 1 teams. Things like our community demographics, our access to green spaces, our access to faith-based organizations, the number of our families that have insurance plans or that are accessing food need, the number of calls, again, in aggregate to crisis center or hospital visits, again, to give us a full picture of our community so that we can program and strengthen what we're doing inside the school context. So it's really important to screen from multiple views. This is an example from one of our communities who's bringing in other data sources, and they actually put it right there on the agenda to prompt those discussions around some of the interactions that are taking place, like, for example, in the Department of Children and Family, getting those child welfare information. And many of our schools are investing in a handle with care protocol where if an event happens outside of the school day, it may be that a crisis occurred at the home the evening before, and we become aware of that. The community alerts the school that then just says, hey, they don't give out any information other than this particular child needs a handle with care day. And they know that something's going on in their life, that they need special TLC on that specific day. And it really allows us to ground ourselves in staying in a place of curiosity and not judgment, and staying in a place of knowing the story and knowing that something's going on and not assigning blame or getting frustrated with that student, because we have a larger kind of story and a larger picture. And it helps us have an empathetic response rather than, maybe a harmful response where we get frustrated because we're also stressed out. So that handle with care protocol is a really important element to consider. This is an example of taking that data at Tier 2 and Tier 3 and looking at the number of overall students participating in that specific Tier 2 intervention and the number of students who are responding. And this tells us a different story, right? If we have 10 students that are involved in check and check out and only 2 are showing success or benefiting from it, we might want to take a look at the extent to which we are implementing with high quality and fidelity. And so again, that gives us a different kind of picture rather than just focusing on the student at hand. It gives us a broader picture in the context of something that we might need to change about the system. So we love this intervention tracking tool because it really helps lift up the Tier 2, Tier 3 team into that systems planning review rather than staying focused on that individual child. Okay, so I'm going to quickly talk about Gardner. And the really cool thing about this section, I'm going to go through it really fast, but we have a recording of this on our website, and I'll make sure that I post the link so you can hear more from Gardner Public Schools in Massachusetts. So a couple of things. They were a system, they are in year 3. So this is a long-term journey, a long-term process when we talk about systems change and we talk about kind of enhancing our PBIS and MTS efforts. And one of the things that some key takeaways is that it really started at the top. It was the acknowledgement of the superintendent and the executive level leadership that allowed this transformation to occur. And it came about because they felt like they were just putting out fires. They just were, all of the support staff were on walkies and they were just in crisis mode. And they had some data points that they were really concerned about. They had increases in office referrals with younger and younger age students, and they had some attendance issues. And so those data points allowed them to have a laser focus on the task at hand. And they focused on the systems, right? They focused on the teaming structures. They focused on whether or not staff felt like they were getting adequate support. And so a couple of systems changes occurred. One is that they situated MTSS ISF into their strategic planning process, which meant it elevated its priority. They built MTSS into their manual, into their operations, right? They standardized it in instead of having MTSS be seen as just one more thing to do, one thing that we're adding to the plate, MTSS became their plate. It was their overall organization system. They also prioritized clinicians' time and protected their time from non-clinical functions, right? I am a former school counselor, and the very first thing that happened to me when I started at an elementary school was I got other duties as assigned. When there weren't adequate staff in the building, I was the one that was in the classrooms. When it came time to do testing, I was the one charged with testing. We have to make sure that we're protecting our clinicians' time to do the thing that they've been trained on. And I know that's tough right now, given the staff shortages right now, but it's going to be up to, again, the executive level decision-making authority at the district that's going to have to make these decisions and figure out the ways we staff without taking clinicians' time away from task at hand. At the data level, they integrated and consolidated their data. They made sure that data was really easy to get access to. And they gave a lot of coaching and support around that data-based decision-making process at the team. And they helped make sure that there was adequate coaching. And they scripted the moves for them so that when a problem of practice arose, the district had embedded into the school team to help support and give them really specific strategies to move forward. And then finally, they gave so much coaching and professional development around this. They were really transparent around the fact that we were asking staff to do things that we've never asked them to do before. And so how do we make sure we give ample coaching around that? How do we make sure that we are actually invested in evidence-based practices? We invest in a lot of bunk in education, a lot of things that look really good, seem really good. We get sold a bill of goods, and it actually doesn't have evidence behind it. So we need to make sure that we're using a formal process to select evidence-based practices, but just because it has evidence doesn't mean you need it. Make sure you customize to fit the strengths and needs of the students that you're serving, which may mean that the district, when they adopt an evidence-based strategy, that they don't assume that every school needs it. They might look across the landscape of schools and say, you know what, 3 schools need this area of focus. Can we bring these 3 schools in as a cohort and kick it up a notch? It may be that another 3 schools needs another evidence-based practice. So again, how do we get better at sorting our schools by different areas of need rather than casting a net and saying everybody needs everything all the time? The other thing about this district is that they were laser focused again on fidelity. And again, they relied on coaching supports, and they embedded themselves into the classroom setting to work side by side with teachers to increase their skills and capacity to do this work. And so here's an example of scripting the moves, right? Identifying a problem area at the team and pushing in a coaching support and using a tool to guide that specific skill need at the team level. And they also have data. So in year 3, they've been able to showcase across the district that as a result of investing in redesigning the system, they are actually decreasing exclusionary practices. They use a formal universal screener in this district, and they can progress monitor data in the aggregate for students who are decreasing elevated scores, and they've focused on internalizing needs, right? So this is a great example as we're using universal screeners more and more as one data element that informs our Tier 1 instruction. We can also use the data to celebrate outcomes. We're not giving away any specific names. It's all data in the aggregate, and we can celebrate the fact that there was a decrease in those students with extremely elevated status. And again, here's another example of using that screener in aggregate and then just showcasing the benefits of students who are decreasing their self-report on. And then we've got the last one, I think, in this is attendance improvement. The big idea here is that too often when we are creating an evaluation metric around mental health or wellness, we oftentimes rely on data points like access to care. That's not good enough, right? We would never create a data point around reading and just measure attendance. We need to make sure that we invest in evidence-based treatment, and that before we start that treatment or we start that mental health intervention, together as a team, we decide together how we're going to measure fidelity and what the outcome measurement will be. And in this case, they've been able to elevate behavior referrals going down and attendance going up as their metric around wellness. They also talked about the instructional minutes gained, right? Make every minute count, and they can look across the district to see how they've been able to gain those instructional minutes by investing in this systems change redesign. So I'm not sure if we have any questions coming from chat. I don't see anything right now. We've obviously given you a lot to chew on, but if you're interested in taking a deeper dive, I wanted to highlight 2 additional resources. One comes from Washington State. Justin Poulos and Kelsey Schmitz put together an extraordinary series of interviews from leaders across the country, and they have different focus areas. And this month's focus area is on teaming and the importance of teaming. And so I wanted to offer that video clip as a way to maybe show with your colleagues or show during a team meeting to inspire you to strengthen your teaming approach. And then the other resource we wanted to elevate comes from a couple of weeks ago from our national forum, and it focuses on school level implementation. And you can get the whole backstory of Gardner School District, and you can hear from the leaders in that. And again, it's recorded. Have a party, bring your team around, watch it together, an action plan around it together, and pop some popcorn and enjoy it. So with that, I'll let Joni, do you have any concluding comments or something that we need to elevate before, or questions coming in?
I just added those links to the chat so people could you can click on them in the chat if you're not able to write them down. But I'm really excited to see that. I didn't know about that team-driven shared leadership, so I'm definitely going to check that out. I'm very excited to see that piece. And I think, like we said earlier, this webinar is recorded. So soon I'm sure it will be posted on the center's website, and you'll be able to share it with colleagues. I'll put my email in the chat if anyone wants to follow up with any questions.
Sounds good. I'll do the same. And remember, think about doing just one thing from the webinar. Don't try to take on too much. If you know that you need to strengthen your agenda for your team meeting minutes, just focus on that aspect of the webinar. If you are concerned about family and youth voice, just focus on that aspect. There's a lot that you can pull apart, and we're realizing that everybody's kind of overwhelmed. So just do one small thing at a time. Do that well before you move to the next thing. So take good care of yourselves. It's been an honor and pleasure to be with you today, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.